Hey there, fellow deep divers. Ready for a deep dive into something super relevant these days?
I'm ready. What are we diving into today?
We're going deep on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI.
Hmm.
But we're going way beyond just the buzzwords, okay?
Sounds good to me.
We've got this really interesting blog post debating the necessity of DEI initiatives in 2025.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen that one.
It lays out some super thought-provoking points from both sides, for and against.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear where this deep dive goes.
I think it'll be a good one.
Yeah.
So we're not just looking at DEI as like a checkbox for companies.
Right.
We're really going to unpack how it's evolved, right? And
Yeah.
like how it really impacts companies and organizations.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are talking about it, but do they really understand it?
Yeah, and why is it sparking so much debate?
Right, exactly.
We want you to walk away from this deep dive with a solid understanding of like what DEI can really do. But also hear the criticisms so you can form your own opinions, informed opinions about DEI.
Yeah, because there are definitely a lot of different opinions out there.
And get this, companies are spending billions
Wow. Billions.
with a B
Wow.
on DEI training every single year.
That's a lot of money.
It is. But is it actually making a difference?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It really is.
With that amount of investment, we need to know if it's working.
Exactly.
And not just for the companies, but for society as a whole.
Right.
It's about the future of our workplaces. You know?
Yeah, totally. So before we get into all of that, let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay.
What does DEI actually mean?
Yeah, good point.
More than just a trendy acronym, it's about creating workplaces where everyone feels like they belong, like genuinely belong,
Right.
and are respected for who they are, and where they can contribute their best work.
Right. I mean, that's what every company wants, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Engaged employees.
Totally.
And it starts with diversity, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging and valuing the unique mix of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives that people bring to a company.
So instead of just tolerating differences, we're saying those differences are a strength.
Precisely. If everyone had the same background and perspective, can you imagine?
Yeah.
It would be boring
Yep.
and probably not that successful.
Right. Okay, so diversity is the
Right.
mix of people, right? But then there's equity.
Yeah.
So it's not just about having a seat at the table, but making sure everyone has an equal chance to succeed once they're at the table.
Exactly. It's recognizing that not everyone starts at the same place.
So you might need different support or resources to have an equal opportunity.
Right. Some people might need more support than others.
And that's where inclusion comes in, right?
Yeah.
You can have a diverse group of people, but if they don't feel included, what's the point?
Exactly. Inclusion is key. It's that feeling of belonging, knowing your voice matters, that your contributions are valued.
And that you're a vital part of the team.
Exactly.
And, this whole idea of DEI didn't just come out of nowhere. It's got roots in the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Those movements really pushed for equity and representation in all parts of society.
Yeah, it's been a long journey.
And it's really interesting to see how DEI has evolved from just being about compliance to actually being a core part of a company's strategy.
Right, it's becoming part of the company culture.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 2025.
Okay.
What does the DEI landscape look like now? There's definitely more awareness now, right?
Yeah, definitely. More awareness and more companies are feeling the pressure to be socially responsible.
Right. There's a bigger push for it. Things are shifting, don't you think?
Absolutely. The blog post even mentions that something like 70% of Fortune 500 companies have a whole DEI department now.
Wow, 70%.
Yeah, or at least a chief diversity officer. That's how seriously they're taking it.
That's a big shift.
It is, but like we were saying before, there's a difference between talking the talk and walking the walk.
Right.
How are companies actually making those changes happen? Are those policies actually making things more equitable and inclusive?
That's the key question, right?
It is. One of the biggest things is figuring out how to measure it.
The impact.
Yeah, the impact. How do we know it's working?
And here's where things get really interesting. The blog post says that even with all those billions spent on DEI training, almost 60% of employees don't see a real difference in their workplace culture.
Oh, wow. 60%.
Yeah,
That's a pretty big gap.
it really is. It seems like there's a disconnect somewhere.
It makes you wonder how these DEI initiatives are being put into practice, What's working and what isn't.
Right. It seems like there's a need to go beyond those generic solutions.
Yeah, the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't seem to be cutting it.
So are there any companies out there that are, getting it right or at least seeing some positive results?
Well, yeah, the blog post actually talks about a tech company that totally changed their recruiting
Okay.
and their mentorship programs to target a more diverse group of candidates.
And what happened?
Their workforce diversity increased by like 30%.
Wow. That's a huge jump.
It is. So there are companies out there seeing some real results.
But I'm guessing it's not always smooth sailing.
Oh, definitely not. The blog post mentions companies that got pushback from employees when they tried to implement DEI.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened?
Some employees felt like it was being forced on them too quickly, or that they were actually being disadvantaged by the new initiatives.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, it's definitely something companies need to be really careful about. Change is hard. You have to do it thoughtfully and communicate clearly with everyone.
It sounds like a really delicate process.
It is.
So it's kind of a mixed bag right now. Some companies are doing well, others are still struggling with it.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot to unpack here.
We do. Lots to discuss.
But before we dive into all the arguments for and against DEI, I think we should look at a real-world example,
Oh, yeah, good idea.
to really bring these concepts to life.
Totally. Examples are always helpful.
The blog post actually highlights this company, Solar Flare, that was having some problems with inclusion.
Solar flare, okay.
We can look at what happened with them and see what lessons we can learn from their experience.
Okay, I like that. What kind of problems were they having?
Well, it seems like they had a diverse workforce on paper,
Oh, okay.
but employees from underrepresented groups didn't really feel included.
Ah, so they had diversity but not inclusion.
Exactly.
Right.
And, get this, it was actually starting to hurt their bottom line.
Really? How?
Well, employees from underrepresented groups were leaving the company more often.
Oh, so higher turnover.
Yep, and they were having a hard time attracting new talent from diverse backgrounds.
That's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it really is.
So what did they do about it?
Well, they did a bunch of things, actually. First, they did a company-wide survey to figure out what was going on. They wanted to hear directly from their employees.
Oh, so they went right to the source.
Yep, and based on that feedback, they realized they needed to make some big changes, like to their whole company culture.
Wow, that's a big undertaking.
It was, yeah. They even created a special DEI task force.
Oh, wow. A whole task force.
Yeah, and it had people from every level of the company, not just managers or executives.
Oh, interesting. So they were really trying to get everyone involved.
Exactly. This task force was in charge of, coming up with new DEI initiatives and actually putting them into practice. They had the power to make real changes.
It sounds like they were really serious about making a difference.
They were. They really wanted to create a sense of shared ownership over DEI, not just leave it to HR or something.
Right, make it everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. And it seems like that was a big reason why they were successful.
How so?
Well, by getting everyone involved, they made the whole process more inclusive and collaborative,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So more people felt like they were part of the solution, and they supported the changes that were happening.
Yeah, I could see how that would make a big difference.
So what kind of stuff did this task force actually do?
Well, one of the first things they did was revamp their hiring practices.
Oh, okay. How?
They started doing blind resume reviews.
Blind resume reviews?
Yeah, so they took out all the identifying information from the resumes, stuff like names and gender.
Oh, so the people reviewing the resumes wouldn't be biased by those things.
Exactly. And they also started looking for candidates from a wider range of places, like universities and professional networks that serve underrepresented communities.
So they were really trying to broaden their talent pool.
Yeah, definitely.
Did it work?
It seems like it did. They also made everyone in the company take DEI training.
Oh, really? What was in the training?
Stuff like unconscious bias, microaggressions, and inclusive leadership.
So making people aware of those things and how to avoid them.
Exactly.
Do you think people push back on the training?
Oh, I'm sure some did. Not everyone's going to be happy with change, especially when it comes to something like DEI.
Right.
But the leadership at Solar Flare really stuck to their guns,
They didn't back down.
Nope. And they really made an effort to talk to their employees, address their concerns, and be really open and honest with them about everything.
It sounds like they handled it really well.
Yeah, they did. They admitted they'd made mistakes in the past and that they still had work to do.
But they were committed to making things better.
Exactly.
I like that. It's refreshing to hear about a company that's so transparent and honest about their DEI journey.
It is, and it seems like that honesty really resonated with their employees. Over time, their company culture started to change.
For the better.
Yeah, employees from underrepresented groups started to feel more valued and included, and they were less likely to leave the company.
So their efforts were actually paying off.
They were.
Did they see any other benefits, like, to their business?
Yeah, actually, they did.
Like what?
Well, the blog post says that they had a big increase in innovation and creativity.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, they think it was because of their more diverse and inclusive workforce. People felt more comfortable sharing their ideas.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it wasn't just ideas, it was the way they executed them, too. They found that their diverse teams were better at understanding their customers, which were also diverse.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So their customers were happier.
Yeah, and that led to more revenue for the company.
So their DEI efforts weren't just good for their employees, they were good for business, too.
Exactly. It shows that doing the right thing can also be good for your bottom line.
I love that. So what are some of the big takeaways from Solarflare's experience? What can other companies learn from them?
Well, I think the biggest thing is listening to your employees.
Yeah, hearing their experiences firsthand.
Yeah, you can't create an inclusive workplace if you don't understand the challenges that people are facing.
And it's not just about listening, it's about doing something about it.
Right, taking action. Solarflare didn't just talk about DEI, they actually made big changes to how they did things.
And they had their leadership team on board.
Yeah, that's super important. The leadership has to be fully committed to DEI and make it a top priority for the whole company.
So it can't just be like one person's pet project.
Exactly. Everyone has to be on board, and it's a long-term commitment.
Not a quick fix.
Nope. Real change takes time and effort, and there are going to be bumps along the way.
But Solarflare showed that it's worth it.
Totally. They're a great example of how doing the right thing can also lead to success.
I love that. So we've seen how DEI can work in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's dive into the big debate surrounding it.
Okay, I'm ready.
What are the arguments for and against DEI initiatives? Why is it so important, and what are some of the criticisms?
All right, let's get into it.
So what are the reasons people are pushing so hard for DEI? What are the arguments in favor of it?
Well, one of the big arguments is that it just makes for a happier workplace.
Happier.
Yeah, when people feel valued and respected for who they are, they're just more likely to be happy at work, more engaged.
Right, like if you feel like you belong, you're going to be more invested in your job.
Exactly. And there's actually research that shows this is true. Like, studies have found that inclusive work environments have higher employee satisfaction.
Makes sense.
Lower turnover rates, too. People are less likely to quit if they feel good about where they work.
So it's not just about feeling good, it's about having a more productive workforce.
Exactly. Happy employees are productive employees.
Right. But what about the company itself? How does DEI impact that?
Well, a lot of people believe that DEI is a key driver of creativity and innovation.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Think about it. When you have a team with people from all different backgrounds, they bring all sorts of different ideas and perspectives to the table.
Right, if everyone in the room thinks the same way, you're probably going to miss out on some good ideas.
Exactly. That's what makes diversity so valuable. There was even a study in the Harvard Business Review that found that companies with diverse leadership are way more likely to capture new markets.
Wow, really?
Yeah, something like 70% more likely. That's a huge advantage.
So diversity isn't just like a nice thing to have. It can actually make a company more successful.
Absolutely. And then there's decision making.
Oh, right.
When you have a variety of voices in the room, you're more likely to make good decisions.
Because you're seeing things from different angles.
Exactly. You're less likely to miss something important. There was a McKinsey study that showed that companies with more diverse leadership teams were way more profitable.
More profitable, so it's good for the bottom line.
It is. And it's not just about the numbers. It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels like they can contribute.
Right, where everyone has a voice.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like there are some pretty strong arguments for DEI. But, like any issue, there are also some criticisms, right?
Yeah. Not everyone agrees that DEI is a good thing.
Okay. What are some of those criticisms?
Well, one of the big ones is the idea of reverse discrimination.
Reverse discrimination.
Yeah, some people are worried that by focusing on diversity, we might end up discriminating against people from majority groups.
Oh, so like they're worried that qualified candidates might be passed over in favor of someone less qualified just to meet a diversity quota.
Exactly. And they argue that this goes against the idea of meritocracy.
Right, the idea that the best person for the job should get it, regardless of their background.
Right.
So how do you balance those two things? the need for diversity, and the importance of choosing the most qualified candidate.
It's a tough question, but I think it's important to remember that DEI isn't about lowering standards.
Right.
It's about creating a level playing field where everyone has a fair shot.
So it's about removing the barriers that might prevent qualified candidates from even getting a chance.
Exactly. It's about making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed.
Okay, that makes sense. What are some other criticisms of DEI?
Well, another common one is that some DEI efforts just feel forced or inauthentic.
Like they're just checking boxes.
Yeah, and that can actually be harmful.
How so?
Well, if people feel like they're only being included to meet some quota, it can actually create more division.
Oh, right, because it feels fake.
Exactly.
So how do you make sure that DEI initiatives are genuine?
I think it starts with leadership.
Okay.
Leaders have to be truly committed to DEI and actually put in the work to create an inclusive culture.
It can't just be a PR stunt.
Right. And it's important to involve employees at all levels.
So everyone feels like they're part of the process.
Exactly. And you have to focus on outcomes, not just activities. It's not enough to just have a DEI policy. You have to actually measure whether it's making a difference.
Right. Are things actually getting better?
Exactly. And it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to DEI. What works for one company might not work for another. You have to tailor your strategy to your specific needs.
So it's about being flexible and adapting as you go.
Right.
Now, the blog post also talked about how important leadership is for DEI.
Yeah, leadership is crucial.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, leaders set the tone for the whole organization.
Okay.
If they're really committed to DEI, it trickles down to everyone else.
So it's not enough to just have a policy in place. Leaders have to actually model inclusive behavior.
Exactly. They have to be mindful of their own biases, seek out diverse perspectives, and promote inclusion in everything they do.
So they have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. And they have to create a culture of accountability where everyone feels comfortable speaking up if they see something wrong.
So it's about making sure that everyone feels responsible for upholding those DEI values.
Right.
What are some specific things that leaders can do to create a more inclusive workplace?
Well, first of all, they need to be really clear about their vision for DEI. They need to communicate it clearly to everyone in the organization. Make it part of the company's mission and values.
So it's not just an afterthought, it's central to who they are.
Right. And then they need to back that up with actions.
Like what?
Things like setting diversity targets, investing in DEI initiatives, and tracking their progress over time.
So it's not just about saying the right things, it's about putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And it's also important for leaders to create a culture of open dialogue.
Where people can speak freely.
Yeah, where employees can share their experiences and concerns without fear of retaliation.
So it's about creating a safe space for honest conversation.
Right. And leaders need to be open to feedback.
And willing to change.
Exactly. They need to be willing to admit when they're wrong and to make changes based on what they hear.
So it's about being humble and being willing to learn.
Definitely. And leaders also need to be proactive about addressing bias and discrimination.
So it's not just about reacting to incidents after they happen.
No, it's about being proactive and trying to prevent those incidents from happening in the first place.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, it's about looking at their policies and practices to see if there are any systemic biases built in.
Right, like maybe there's a hiring practice that unintentionally disadvantages certain groups of people.
Exactly. And it's about making sure that everyone in the organization is aware of their own biases and is working to overcome them.
So it's a lot of work.
It is, but it's important work.
Okay, so we've talked about the past and the present of DEI. What about the future? What are some of the trends we should be paying attention to?
Well, one of the big ones is the role of technology.
Technology.
Yeah, technology is changing the way companies approach DEI.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, for one thing, companies are using data analytics to get a better understanding of their DEI performance.
So they're using data to see where they're doing well and where they need to improve.
Exactly. And they're using AI to help reduce bias in hiring.
AI, like artificial intelligence.
Yeah. There are AI platforms that can analyze job descriptions and resumes to make sure they're not biased against certain groups.
Wow, so it's like having a computer program that checks for bias.
Pretty much. And as AI gets more sophisticated, we're going to see even more applications in the field of DEI.
It sounds like technology has the potential to really make a difference.
It definitely does. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool.
Right.
It's up to us to use it responsibly and ethically.
So it's not about replacing human judgment with algorithms.
No, it's about using technology to help us make better decisions.
Okay, I like that. What are some other trends in DEI?
Well, another one is the growing focus on intersectionality.
Intersectionality, what's that?
It's the idea that different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, and sexual orientation, all intersect and can create unique experiences of discrimination.
So it's not enough to just think about those things separately.
Right. You have to think about how they all come together. For example, a Black woman might face different challenges than a white woman or a Black man.
Right, because she's dealing with both racism and sexism.
Exactly.
So how does that apply to DEI in the workplace?
Well, it means that companies need to be more nuanced in their approach.
Okay.
They need to think about how different forms of discrimination might be affecting their employees and create policies and programs that address those specific needs.
So it's about moving beyond just checking boxes and really trying to understand the lived experiences of your employees.
Exactly.
What other trends are you seeing?
Another big one is the demand for transparency and accountability.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, employees, investors, and customers are all putting more pressure on companies to show that they're actually committed to DEI.
So it's not enough to just say you're doing it, you have to prove it.
Right.
So how are companies doing that?
Well, a lot of them are publishing DEI reports that show their progress on things like diversity representation and pay equity.
So they're making their data public.
Yeah, and some companies are even setting public diversity goals and tracking their progress against those goals.
So they're holding themselves accountable.
Exactly. And it's working. When companies know that people are watching, they're more likely to take DEI seriously.
It's like they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Right.
So it sounds like the future of DEI is pretty promising.
I think so. There are definitely challenges, but there's also a lot of momentum and a lot of people who are working hard to make things better.
Okay, so what are some of the key takeaways from all of this?
Yeah.
What do our listeners need to remember about DEI?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that it's an ongoing journey.
Okay.
There's no finish line. We're always learning and evolving.
And it takes effort from everyone.
Right. Leaders, employees, everyone has to be on board. And we have to be willing to challenge ourselves and each other.
To be better.
Yeah. And we have to remember that DEI isn't just about being nice.
Okay.
It's about creating a more just and equitable world. And that benefits everyone.
I love that. So we've talked about the big picture of DEI, but now I want to talk about the personal side of it.
Oh, yeah, that's important too.
The blog post we're talking about has some really powerful stories from people who have been affected by DEI initiatives.
I bet. It's one thing to talk about statistics and policies, but it's another thing to hear about how DEI is actually impacting people's lives.
Exactly. So let's dive into some of those stories and see what we can learn from them. It's so important to hear these personal stories.
Yeah, it really brings it home.
You know, it reminds us that this isn't just theoretical.
Right.
This is about real people's lives. The blog post talks about this marketing professional who was really skeptical of DEI training at first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they thought it was just another corporate thing they had to do.
Just going through the motions.
And that changed their mind.
Well, they did a session on implicit bias, and it really opened their eyes.
Wow. So just one session had that much of an impact?
It did. They said it totally changed their perspective. That's pretty amazing.
It really shows you how powerful education can be.
Yeah, when you understand something, you can start to change it.
Right. And that can have a ripple effect.
Totally, from the individual to the organization.
The blog post also talks about this senior executive who is super dedicated to DEI.
Oh, cool.
But they faced a lot of pushback.
Really? From who?
Other employees. It sounds like they were trying to change a really ingrained culture.
Oh, wow, that's tough.
Yeah, but they didn't give up. They kept pushing for
Good
it.
for them.
They changed their hiring practices, created mentorship programs,
Wow.
really tried to foster inclusion at every level.
And did it work?
It did.
Huh.
They diversified their workforce, and their employees were more engaged and more innovative.
That's fantastic.
It really shows that change is possible, but it takes time and commitment from leadership.
It does, yeah.
Now, not all the stories are positive.
Oh, right.
There's one from someone who felt like their company's DEI efforts were totally fake,
Oh, no.
like it was all for show.
Just checking boxes.
Exactly. They felt like the company didn't really care about creating real change.
That's so disappointing.
It is.
And it can actually be harmful, you know?
Harmful. How so?
Well, it gives people a false sense of progress, like everything's fine when it's really not.
Right, and it might prevent them from actually addressing the real issues.
Exactly.
So it sounds like it's really important for companies to be genuine about their DEI efforts.
Absolutely.
They can't just be surface level stuff.
It has to be real systemic change.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the why of DEI,
Hmm.
but what about the how? Are there any legal things that companies have to consider?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are actual laws that protect people from discrimination in the workplace.
Okay, like what?
Well, there's the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race, religion, gender,
Right.
and the Americans with Disabilities Act, which protects people with disabilities.
So these laws are kind of like the foundation for DEI.
They are, yeah. They ensure that everyone has equal opportunities.
But a lot of companies go beyond just following the law,
They
right?
do, yeah. Because it's not just about avoiding legal trouble, it's about doing the right thing.
Creating a workplace where everyone feels valued.
Exactly. And that can actually be good for business, too.
Right. We talked about that earlier.
Happier employees, better reputation, all that good stuff.
It seems like a lot of companies are using DEI training programs these days.
Yeah, they're becoming really popular.
What's the purpose of those programs?
Well, they're a good way to raise awareness about DEI issues and give people the tools to create a more inclusive environment.
So they go beyond just the legal stuff.
Oh, yeah, they cover things like unconscious bias, microaggressions, cultural sensitivity.
Interesting.
It's all about helping people understand each other better.
And giving them practical strategies for being more inclusive.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really great deep dive.
It has, yeah. We've covered a lot.
So, any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that DEI is a journey.
Not a destination.
Right. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to keep learning and growing.
And everyone has to be involved.
Exactly. From the CEO to the newest employee.
We all have a role to play in creating a more inclusive world.
I agree. It's a collective effort.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore these issues.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing for a more inclusive future for all of us.